Hey folks, John here, Old Hickory Forge. Welcome back. If it's your first time here, welcome. So what's going on this evening, I'm out here in the workshop. I'm making up a small batch of railroad spike knives for a good buddy of mine who wants to sell them in his store. And I've been asked quite a few times to make a spike knife video, so I figured I'd bring you guys along. If you want to check it out, stick around. I'm actually really excited to make this video. I kind of feel like I'm going back to my roots. You know, back when I was just starting out doing craft shows and things like that, railroad spike knives were kind of one of my workhorse items because they always sold and they were something I could make fast and sell for relatively cheap. And I feel like after how long and complicated that sword project was, this is going to be a real nice palate cleanser. Before we get started on the project, I do want to touch on a couple of little notes right quick. The first common question I want to touch on is what steel are spikes actually made of? And the spikes that have the HC marking on the head, which are the ones I use for everything I make out of spikes, that marking stands for high carbon. Now, that does not actually mean high carbon in the sense of blade steels. It kind of means high carbon in the sense of a railroad spike. And according to American Railway Association standards, spikes with that marking are to have between 0.30 and 0.35% carbon, whereas compared to a proper blade steel like 1084 is going to have 0.84%. So it's a step above mild steel and a step below a medium carbon steel. With a water quench and no temper, they will harden a little bit. You can expect a Rockwell maybe in the mid-40s, but they're never going to get as hard as a proper blade steel. Now, you can split these and using a sand my technique, forge well then good steel, and I have done that. But the reason I don't generally recommend bothering with it is because if this is the kind of thing you're going to make and sell like at a craft show or in a consignment store or something like that, the kind of people who are going to look at this and want to buy it aren't really going to care about that. They're just going to see one spike knife for $40 and one spike knife for $100, and you can sit there until you're blue in the face and try to explain that you know, this took a lot more skill and a lot more effort and it's better steel and it's going to be a better knife. But the kind of people buying spike knives, they buy them because they're made of spikes, not because they reasonably expect a good knife. So to them, it's all the same. I'm not discouraging anyone from doing it. If you want to do it, go ahead. But if you ask me in a money-making sense, it's really not worth the trouble. Next point I want to touch on is something that's a lot less common, but it's something I've seen come up in conversation enough times to where I felt as though I needed to say something, and that's legality. There's a very small but vocal cohort of people in the blacksmith community who will just absolutely lose their minds anytime they see something made of a railroad spike, and they'll go off talking about trespassing and stolen property and possession of stolen property and this and that. I even had one guy in a comment section on a video years ago where I was making a bottle opener out of one of these tell me that I was committing a felony, which is all that's complete and utter nonsense. It's not true in the slightest. It is illegal to walk the tracks and take them. It's not illegal to buy them online, you know, from an authorized seller. They're not illegal to own or possess. They're not illegal to make into things. Just, you know, don't walk the tracks and take them and you got nothing to worry about. Also, they're very inexpensive. If you look around online, you can find these on eBay for $2 a piece or less. So going out trying to find them in the wild is not only illegal, but is a complete and total waste of your time, in my opinion. So anytime someone tries to come at you sideways with some nonsense like that, you have my permission to cyberbully them into oblivion. But anyway, I'll quit running my mouth. Let's make a knife. So the first thing I've done, and this step is optional, but I just squared up the back of the spike that's going to become the handle using the power hammer. That could just as easily be done by hand, and we are going to be doing the rest of the project by hand, but you know, I got to get this done. But then we went ahead and put some center punch marks. We're going to be doing a reverse twist on this particular knife. So we have one approximately 3.5 inches and then one approximately halfway to that. I just, you know, kind of eyeballed it. It doesn't got to be dead perfect. But, you know, about 3.5 inches from the bottom of the head to where the end of your handle is going to be is kind of, you know, the sweet spot I've found for making a comfortable handle on these things. Here's one I forged earlier, still needs to be finished. But you get the idea, so let's get this guy back in the fire and get it twisted. The first twist is pretty simple. Just chuck it up at the vise at that first center punch mark. Go one full turn, left or right, doesn't really matter. And what I've done now is I've cooled the head of the spike off in the slack tub, just past the end of my first twist. We'll chuck it up in the vise at our second center punch mark, and then go the opposite way of our first twist. So that's our reverse twist, nothing to it, but you could throw pretty much any twist you can think of on there. There's no wrong way to do it. Next step is to isolate the material for the blade, so we're going to use a guillotine tool with a set of Fullerig dies. You could also use a spring swage, so just put it right at the end of your twist. and this will make it much easier to forge out the blade material without damaging the twist. So just bring those fullers in to about the thickness you want on your finished blade. I like to aim for around 3/16. But anyway, let's make a blade. The first thing we need to do is get more width, so we're going to go at it with the cross beam of our hammer. And when you're forging out the material for the blade, be sure to keep the twist off of the anvil as much as you can to avoid marring it up. After a few heats with the cross peen and then kind of flattening things up with the face of my hammer, this is what we got. Next step, we need to move the material for the blade over so that the spine's in line with the top of the handle. I like to use the end of the horn of my anvil and just kind of strike over here. And then we need to start straightening out what's going to become the cutting edge. And then we need to start roughing in the point and the tentative profile of the blade. So after moving the material around, you should end up with something that looks kind of like this. It's still too narrow, so the next thing we're going to do is pull some bevels out of this guy. Bevel the blade, we're just going to kind of strike at an angle and try to thin out the material towards the cutting edge, if that makes sense. As we're forging out the bevels, the blade is naturally going to curve. So the next step, what we're going to do is start thinning down the spine of the knife, and that'll help straighten it out. Then we'll give it the old touch mark. Then we'll take one more heat with the blade and the vise and just kind of tweak things and make sure it's all straight and looking good. So with these, all I do pre-heat treat is just kind of tidy up the profile and then normalize them 3 times. I'm not sure if that, really helps or not on such a low carbon steel, but it certainly doesn't hurt anything. So now we're going to quench these bad boys. All I do to heat treat these is an edge quench, just in water. And then while it's still warm, I'll take it to my Parks 50 quench oil, but really any oil like canola oil or boiled linseed oil or anything would really work fine. This doesn't have anything to do with hardening the blade. This just kind of bakes the oil onto the surface of the steel and makes it a nice soft black color. So that's all there is to it. It's pretty common whenever you forge this spike steel down so thin and do a water quench on the edge that you're going to get warps. But with the spike steel not really getting that hard, and because we only quenched the edge, you can honestly just fix that cold at the anvil. See? Now it's good and straight. That'll do it, really. So, there we go. You got the batch all done, good and sharp, ready to head out. Quick note while I'm thinking about it, if you're wondering about this wrench that I use for grabbing spikes by the head to twist them, it's a special design that I came up with and had machined. I toyed with the idea of selling them, and when I had them made, I based the interior dimensions on the head of a brand new spike, figuring that would fit most spikes out there. But I quickly ran into the problem of that not being the case. I made a batch of 10, and I think 3 of them ended up getting returned because they didn't fit. But if you want to get one made, I'll drop a link to the machinist who makes them, and he can probably square you away. So that's all I got for you. Like I said at the start of the video, I've been asked to make a spike knife video showing how I make them more times than I can count. You know, a lot of people kind of have, trouble with moving the steel around to make a good looking blade with such little material to work with. So I hope you liked the video. I hope you learned something, and y'all take care.